At the start, I'm going to share my screen, and James is going to talk through a couple of slides, and then we'll take it from there. So I will share my screen. So James got slightly patchy connection, so if he's unable to talk at the moment, are you a bit frozen, James?
Signal being a little bit patchier than last week today, so hopefully that's not going to be a problem. But I might allow Phil to just sort of jump in at any point if it's not working. I might just have to keep an eye on everyone so that I can see if anyone can hear me. Everyone hearing me loud and clear?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Great. Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome again to you, and a warm welcome to everyone that this is your first session with us. Really pleased to be sort of offering this training to see if we can't do something about the rather terrifying amount of farm level food waste in the UK and across the world. So we are going to dive straight in with our second session. So we want to try and focus today a little bit on how to build and sort of manage databases of volunteers and participants, and it will have a secondary focus of also looking into sort of onward redistribution, how we share the food among our communities, essentially. So next slide, please, Phil. Cool. And so just a little rundown of how that's going to work today. We want to just try and give everyone the opportunity to introduce themselves to each other, and we'll do that in some breakout rooms, just so you have a bit more of a chance to have a bit of an in-depth discussion there. So we'll do that for a few minutes. It would also be great if everyone could just, I think most people have done it now, but just putting their a brief intro into the chat about where you're from, what your name is, if you've got an organizational affiliation. And then I'm going to hand over to Phil. He's going to do a short presentation, some slides on this question around mobilising volunteers and managing them. And then we're going to do a quick breakout room, similar to last week, where we'll discuss some of the questions on the volunteers. And what we've tried to do is design this around some of the common questions that were coming up from groups last week. So we've tried to incorporate sort of a response to those questions in both the presentation and then where we feel that there's going to be really interesting discussions coming through that, we're going to put that over to you guys. And then we'll come back, feedback with those, have a bit of a break, and then Phil will again help us with a little presentation around distributing the food. Really pleased to say that we're going to have Damien join us later. He's just called me to say that he's available to come join us to share his experiences as a redistribution organisation and what has what's worked well for them and what they look for in a community group. And then we'll do a second breakout answering some of the questions around distribution. And then we've left a little bit more time than last week, so we can have a bit more of a sort of an in-depth Q&A at the end of that as well, and just give people the opportunity to speak their minds. So in terms of an overview of how that fits into the rest of the sessions, so obviously we've got today's session there, which I've just spoken to you about, and then the session, which is going to be next Thursday, is going to be speaking to the idea of us building kind of relationships with farms and farmers, have a bit of an understanding about what it is that a farmer needs from a gleaning group in order to be able to run that nice and smoothly. We're speaking to a couple of farmers that have run gleaning before and trying desperately to pin them down and see if they're willing to give up some of their time to sit at a computer when they could be harvesting. So yeah, hopefully we'll have an opportunity to speak to a farmer, and we'll also be sort of trying to get the perspectives of some experienced gleaning groups and what's worked with them in terms of building the relationships. And then the following session, which will be the final one on Thursday the 10th of September, is kind of all around organizational resilience, kind of some tips and some sharings for different organizational structures that people can work with, or what's worked well for people who are already have a specific kind of organizational structure, and we'll look into the best way of kind of building this network so it can communicate, so you can all communicate with each other and share ideas and learnings afterwards. And we'll have some information, and we'll sort of explore ideas around fundraising as well to make sure that your group will be as resilient and sustainable as possible. Cool. So I'm just going to pass over to Maddie quickly, and she can take us through some of the housekeeping.
Thanks, James. So yeah, obviously we've started to use the chat box already, but please do use it as you go along to share any reflections and thoughts or questions as we go. If you have a question, just write question at the beginning of it, so it's easy for us to pull out of the thread. And any technical issues you're having, just flag them up as they happen, so we try and keep everyone connected. Yeah, there's a raise hand function, which I think is in it's along the bottom of your screen. I've got a slightly different screen set up to you, but hopefully you can see where that is. If you'll see at the top right of your screen, and you may all be familiar with this already, but you can switch between a speaker view or a gallery view. If you click on gallery view, you can see everybody at the same time, which is nice when we're having the group conversations. When somebody's showing their screen like they are now, you can still see people or not in the strip that pops up on the right. You can minimize that if it's in the way of the slide, and you can also pick it up and drag it across to the left into the green bit of the slide, so it's not obscuring any text. Yeah, so just to say, when we're talking together as a whole group or in our breakout rooms, just to be very mindful of everybody being able to have the same time to speak as everybody else, perhaps going in a round one by one, so people aren't interrupted or talking over others, just as we all have so much to learn from each other, and also appreciating that people have different ways that they prefer to communicate, and we want this webinar to be accessible to everybody. So if there's anything that you're finding difficult to see or use, please just flag it up with us. Also, I can hear a bit of background noise, so just right on cue, if you have any background noise, please keep yourself muted and only unmute to speak. Having a pen and paper to hand is very useful, and yeah, we've gone through the recording part. I also just want to say I'm just setting up the breakout room, so we'll do short intros, but I can't see. Could you? Is there another slide, or could we stop the screen share at the moment? Yeah, would you be able to stop your screen share, Phil? Thank you.
No worries.
So we've lost Nosheen. Unfortunately,
She sent me a message saying she had a call for something urgent, so she's had to leave, but
hopefully
she's interested in.
She'll pop back in. Okay, fantastic. So we're just going to, I'm just going to put you into 3 different breakout rooms where we'll just do a short round of introductions to each other. We've done a bit of that already, but to get to know each other a little bit more. I've tried to cluster you by geography a bit, so hopefully that will be useful in terms of making connections with people near you. That's not the case across the board, but I've just tried to do that a bit. And I will put into the, you'll get a little bit of a line of text come up in your breakout room, which is they're just the questions that we want you to sort of answer, the information we'd like you to share with each other. So is that all okay? Just thank you. Okay, here we go. Hello. Sorry, that was
Hello.
that was pretty quick. In and out.
It's perfect for our group.
Great, brilliant. I'm just going to share my screen just so we can have a look at what we did last week. So for those of you who were there, just to remember, those of you who weren't, just to see a bit of what we did. Are we on the right screen? Can you see the Miro board?
Yep.
Great. So this is just to say what we were capturing. Who are you and what brings you here? And what are the key barriers and challenges, perceived or actual, to setting up or developing your gleaning group? So that was the main sort of breakout discussion that we had, which resulted in a bunch of questions, particularly around forming a group, redistribution and connecting with farmers, that we have integrated into the presentation and the sort of learning for today and subsequent weeks. We will go on later today to have more of a discussion. We've got more questions, more virtual post-its to fill in. So that's what it's looking like at the moment. I will pass to you, Phil.
Super, thanks, Maddie. It's nice to see a visualization of last week's chat. Before I launch in with volunteers, was there anything that came out of the introductions that anyone wants to share? No? Okay, I'm going to talk about volunteers then, and there will be a space for discussion at the end of it, and if anything is unclear, then feel free to raise your hand and request a clarification. So let's jump over to mobilising volunteers. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is actually echoed in the handbook that we put together last year, and this is the Gleaning Network's online toolkit. So it's a resource that you can access online. The website is listed on this slide, and it kind of covers quite a lot of the aspects of gleaning. What it doesn't really have is as many real world examples or stories, which I think is the benefit of having a webinar. We get to sort of articulate some of our experiences and share, and also hear some of your experiences and maybe some of your solutions that are slightly better. But at the start, I thought it was just worth flagging that a lot of this content is available as part of the toolkit online. Another thing to mention is that we're talking about mobilising volunteers and organising. One of the things that came out of the questions last week was the need to have an organiser as well as volunteers. So I think from the start, it's worth us just mentioning that a gleaning event does require a coordinator, someone to do a few things, but I think essentially they're liaising. So they're sort of a communication bridge, sharing information between the farmers, the volunteers, and the charities receiving the food. So just because that point was raised last week, we wanted to start off by saying a little bit about the job description of a gleaning coordinator. So there's that initial role, which is to do with relationships of the three main ingredients: farmers, volunteers, and charities. The second aspect of it is running the gleaning days themselves. So that's coordinating logistics for volunteers to get to the farm and supervising them safely whilst they're on site, ensuring all their health and safety is followed during the gleaning day. And then the third aspect is the sort of media and promotional side of gleaning. So that's taking pictures and sharing them, acting as a point of contact if local journalists or national media are interested in reporting on the gleaning day, and in general just being a promotional advocate for the event. Now, that doesn't have to be one person. It can be shared across a group. It is worth saying, though, for any particular event, that kind of middle role, the second point about running the gleaning days, it is worth allocating an individual so that each event has a gleaning coordinator who can be the point of contact for volunteers and the farmer, and understands the logistical run through of the event. There's always that risk of black box thinking if you're working in groups that you sort of assume that someone else that you're working with has it covered. So I think from my experience, having that individual who's allocated to be the coordinator for any one gleaning day is helpful. So that's just a little bit of background on who will be coordinating the volunteers. and we can share that as more detailed, in a more detailed document version of that, if your group is considering trying to appoint someone to cover the functions of the role. So volunteers, absolutely vital, indispensable, and just sort of so key to having a successful Gleaning Day is a good cohort of willing volunteers. They make it actually happen. They do the work. They provide time and energy, and without which a Glean just simply cannot take place. It's really important to stress that the well-being of volunteers is the key #1 priority. That outstrips the prevention of food waste by a long shot. It's far more important that your volunteers have a positive, safe, and worthwhile time than your yield is 10-20% lower than you are sort of hoping you might get. But the other thing about volunteers is that the experience that they have coming on a Gleaning Day is the sort of change. It's the theory of change that can mean that Gleaning has an impact beyond that day's haul. A young person or an older person coming along and Glean and experiencing positively their role in tackling food waste and being part of a solution to food system problems can actually, create ripples in terms of wider change. So that might be as small as their consumer habits being slightly more waste conscious. It might actually lead to them going to another location and setting up their own Gleaning group. It might mean that they become a food activist in another sphere that's not necessarily farm level food waste. But because it's such an experience of traveling somewhere, doing work in a group, having a positive experience and learning, sometimes speaking directly with the farmer about their crop, it's almost a key part of the mission that the volunteer experience is one that volunteers go away feeling like they've made a positive difference, and we hope that is somewhat transformative for them as individuals, as food citizens, working together in a community setting. So that's how important the role of volunteers is with regard to Gleaning. Another good touchstone to think about is why volunteers feel motivated to come out, and sometimes at great inconvenience, traveling for an hour or more to remote locations to do work in sometimes testing weather conditions. So this it's kind of a variety of things that gets people interested in Gleaning. Some people are foodies and they're interested in seeing farms and connecting with their local regional food system and producers. A lot of people have strong environmental concerns, think that being able to proactively make a difference in a practical and on the ground sense has a lot of appeal. There's benefits in working in a team. People like doing physical stuff in positive groups, and alongside that, it's a way to meet other people that might be like-minded. A lot of people have concerns about people in food insecurity, so there's a sort of social justice element of trying to ensure that adequate supply of nutritious food flows into communities of need. Something that's not on the slide that I think is relevant for some people is a sort of therapeutic side of things. They find the work is kind of good for their own well-being, and it's a chance to be in fresh air and in often quite beautiful environments, scenic landscapes, etc. And that kind of links into the kind of more casual motive, which is a day out in the countryside, particularly if they're an urban dweller and don't have their own means of transport. So how do you go about getting volunteers, particularly if you're a new group? Because you need quite a large pool of potential volunteers, and you actually need them in advance of hearing from a farm that there's a surplus crop, because you're likely to have quite short lead out period between hearing of the surplus crop and having the date. Farmers don't plan their waste. Farmers are quite likely to want to try and sell their crop to the last possible moment. So you might have, say, 2, best case 3 weeks notice between hearing about a crop and it being perished. Subsequently, you need to build up this database of email addresses of people in the region who have said, yeah, I'd be interested to hear about a gleaning day and potentially coming. That's, you know, without having a particular date in mind, you'll explain to them what it would be like, why they might want to come. And you can also build up social media followings, and having kind of lists of followers who would like hear you when you say there's a crop that needs rescuing. And as kind of Steve mentioned earlier with regard to Lions groups, there are a lot of community groups that are really kind of eager to find positive, worthwhile volunteer opportunities. So scouting around the kind of landscape of community groups and finding ones where there's potentially a good matchup with Gleaning, potentially if they might have their own transport, they might have a minibus to be able to bring people to a Gleaning day. In the past, we've collaborated with groups like Lions. We've had students' unions send numbers of students along. Faith groups around the world are very active in Gleaning. There's links to there's very big Gleaning groups in Israel and in America as well, and a lot of that is faith-based. And also sports clubs can often turn out large numbers of physically active gleaners. So within your locality, it's obviously going to be quite specific to where you are. It's worth having basically a good address book of people that you could invite to, and how you organize that is kind of up to you. Sometimes having a mailing list program where you can send out invites is best. Sometimes it's as simple as having a Facebook group or a WhatsApp group. It does depend upon your preferred form of communication, and also what the volunteers will respond well to. So you've built up your volunteer base of potential volunteers, and then what you've done is you've heard about a surplus crop. So we'll at a later session next week we'll talk about discovering generating gleaning leads and discovering surpluses. But let's say that you're in a position now to schedule a gleaning day with the farmer and go about recruiting your volunteers. So you do what we call the call outs, which is effectively an invite to get volunteers to come gleaning. And within that call out, you're going to put across a bit of the details. You're going to have an idea of how many volunteers you're going to want to come, and you're going to provide the dates and the rough location. You might decide, and we often do, not to provide the precise location, just to avoid people showing up without having confirmed in advance that they're coming. On this slide, you'll see there's 2 images. Anyone that uses social media is I'm sure aware that images do far better than text on platforms like Twitter and Facebook, and obviously with Instagram it's all imagery. So it's really worth having a good template image that you can use as your call out promotional post. And I just wanted to share, there's the feedback one on the right here, which is for a call out for Sussex blueberries. And what we do, we put that on Facebook and Twitter with a few further details and a link to a Google form that allows people to sign up to come for the day. The image on the left is slightly more snazzy and very nicely designed by our allies in Catalonia called the Espigladors, who are a fantastic cleaning group, been very active in the region around Barcelona over the last few years, and they've just gleaned their 1,000,000th kilo of produce. So they've done over 1,000 tons of gleaning, which means they do know their stuff. You can see that they've included quite a lot of details in the image itself. So they've got a template that has the date and the approximate timings, the number of people that will be needed, the location, how to sign up, and a nice picture of potatoes as well that looked like they were at risk of being outgraded because of uneven sizes. So I think one thing to stress really with this call out is it's an invite that's supposed to be engaging and fun. So the tone of the message is produce is in peril, but with your help we can rescue it. So it's I guess the narrative there is that this produce at risk of going to waste. However, you know, with your help we can rescue it for a good cause. And I think that's kind of a good way to pitch it in terms of being a fun day to come out to, rather than you know, something quite mundane or laborious. And often if you put, you know, pictures of smiling volunteers and beautiful produce alongside it, then it kind of captures a more positive aspect of gleaning, which hopefully appeals to, you know, people if they think, oh, actually I don't have any plans next Tuesday and that looks like fun, I'll give it a go. So that's the call out. Hopefully the call out attracts you some sign-ups and you end up with a list of volunteers that you'll then have a bit of information about. So once they've signed up, you'll need to have the coordinator who's coordinating the event will need to have their contact number, need to know how they're arriving. In some cases, you might actually help provide their lift sharing or travel arrangements. That's something that at the moment with COVID social distancing restrictions, it's a bit of a challenge in terms of travel restrictions, and lift sharing isn't an option, unfortunately, if people aren't in the same household. So in some instances you might coordinate travel and pool people who are traveling from the same area, but it is helpful to know what routes people will be taking, and beyond that it kind of depends on how belt and braces you want to be, whether you need to have a contact emergency contact detail for that individual, and whether you want to have their any medical issues or allergies they have. Both those things are something that we do capture. It would depend really on how formalized and safe you want to be, but I would advise having both those things. So you will have had that information provided when they sign up, and then in turn, a few days before the event, you're going to send them an email which basically says when and where to arrive, what they should wear, provide your contact number, remind them to bring water and lunch, and also to just put in what the weather forecast is, because that can have quite a strong bearing on the day and what they should wear and bring. So that's something that to put across in advance of the event. And I just wanted to put something here about inclusivity, because gleaning is a sort of thing that people of all ages and abilities and backgrounds can come and enjoy. And that's if they've got tons of experience as allotmenters and have been growing veg for 50 years, or if they've never been to a farm before. It is possible to provide a positive and kind of productive gleaning experience for both ends of that spectrum. There's also, particular community groups might want to include volunteers that have additional needs, be it regarding their special learning difficulties or elements of the community of facing disadvantage. And in those instances, it is worth taking a bit of additional time as a coordinator to ensure their travel arrangements and their expectations for the day are suited to their needs. So that might be having a good chat with them on the phone in advance about their route, or even making sure that their lift is provided door to door. But that inclusivity aspect is a key part to making sure Gleaning is a truly inclusive community event. And then during the Gleaning day itself, in terms of inclusivity, a key thing is just to emphasize people can work at their own pace. If they have any ailments or conditions that might prevent them from working at the rate of the others in the group, then just really make sure that they feel comfortable taking an additional break or working at their own pace. And that does link to another aspect of the supervision of volunteers on the day, whereas which is basically that point about volunteer welfare being by far the most important aspect of a Gleaning day. So people will come away from a Gleaning day positive and inspired if they feel like they've had a chance to make a positive difference and work and not feel like they've been, set off at an agricultural boot camp to work really hard for a few hours. So part of that is really emphasizing the enjoyable aspects of the day, and yes, getting the work done, yes, being productive, but also ensuring that they don't feel too sort of burnt out, or in any sense, at most the kind of number of hours that a Gleaning day would be sort of 5-6 hours, and it's that's really sort of at the top end of the amount of work you do over the course of the day. And that kind of relates to this key thing: if it's not fun, you're not doing it right. And it's quite possible to conceive of an alternative Gleaning regime where people are having to work quite hard and potentially not enjoying themselves. And at Feedback, we're always quite keen to emphasize it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. And it might actually be very repetitive, but if you're doing it in good company with good conversation and the mood is positive, then it's a really positive experience for volunteers. So I wanted to add that in as well. I don't have too much more to add. There are aspects in the toolkit to do with supervising volunteers on the day and ensuring their health and safety through obviously having an adequate risk assessment and ensuring that they're able to be briefed at the start of the day on any site-specific hazards, and making sure that they're aware of any risks, and that stuff is really vital to a smooth and safe event. But in terms of what I wanted to share about that, that's basically my aspect of what I've got to say on volunteers. So I'm going to stop sharing screens, and then we can jump into breakout rooms. James, am I good to hand over to you at this point?
Please do, yes.
Cool.
Thank you for that, Phil. Great stuff. Just wanted to quickly address a question that Karen put in the chat box. Can you say a bit about GDPR and mailing lists, keeping contacts, etc.? Excuse me. So yeah, feel free to add anything, Phil, if I haven't quite got it. But how we did have to do, as a lot of organisations, a bit of a switch, sort of a couple of years ago, whenever it was that the new regulations came in. But essentially, we just sent out, obviously, as a campaigning organisation that has various other aspects to our work, we've got like quite a long mailing list, and we send lots of emails about cool stuff that we are doing. So everyone that signed up to hear about Gleaning, we just had to send them an email and get them to opt in specifically to be updated about Gleaning events. And then we would, for each specific Gleaning event, we would then make a Google form, but there are other versions of it that you could use that different levels of encryption, where essentially that person would be asked to answer specific questions related to that Gleaning day, and that information wouldn't be stored sort of past that point. So we would capture things like how many people they're planning on coming with, if they've got any allergies or dietary requirements, anything else that we kind of needed to know about. But and what that meant is that we could send that out to people that weren't necessarily on the mailing list as well. So we had two opportunities: one to just send it out to all of our current followers, and a second one to try and then send it out to sort of try build the network a little bit. But yes, we would. I think you can do yourself a service just by obviously continually asking for people to offer these things, or we would like specifically say that wouldn't sign them up to another list, for example. Does that sort of answer the question, Karen? Great, thank you for that. Okay, so with these breakout rooms that we want to go into now, there's a bit of a some of the reflections from last week and some of the questions that came out of that. We've got some questions that we think it would be great for you to explore in groups. Given that we slightly less thought, I think we're going to go into groups, or we're going to go into 3 groups. Is that right, Maddie?
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, basically so these will all be kind of questions related to volunteer recruitment, management, setting up a group that we feel there's going to be some interesting learnings and things like that to come from. So what I'm going to ask you to do is when you're into the breakout rooms, keep an eye at the top, because Maddie's going to post a list of questions, and then what it'd be good to do is just spend 2 minutes on your own quietly reflecting, jotting down a couple of ideas, and then for each of the 3 questions we're just going to go around and try and get some key points, ideas for sort of common problems that you might come up against. So that whole thing is going to take about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back into our groups, and then each group will have about 10 minutes in total to kind of feed back to the groups. Does that all sound good? Wonderful.
Can I just welcome Charmaine as well, who sort of dropped in, I think, at the some point in the interviews.
Hello.
Hi Charmaine, how you doing?
Hello. Reception's a bit poor, so I've got my picture off.
No problem. Nice. So Charmaine's also an experienced gleaner, so at some point we'll just be deferring to her wisdom, if that's okay. Maybe just have a couple of questions about some reflections on so far.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant. But yeah, for now we can go for the breakout rooms and see you back here in about 15 minutes or so.
Great. They're not the same breakout rooms as you were in before, so you'll meet other people as well. Okay, have a great discussion, and I'll post the questions into the breakout rooms for you. See you in 15 minutes. Maybe if you just sort of self-organize a bit for the next bit, I'm going to share my screen and capture some of your feedback. So we've got 10 minutes, so it's more of a quick key kind of points round relating to some of the questions that you were exploring. It didn't let me assign specific questions to specific groups, as you probably noticed, so it wasn't quite what we'd planned, but hopefully you had some good discussions. So I'm going to share my screen, and then maybe somebody from Joy's group could feedback on your discussion first. That would be great. So maybe cool. You could say what question you were addressing, and some of the points or several of the questions, and what you covered, and I'll try and capture it.
Folks, did you want me to answer the one about COVID transport, and then I can maybe let one of you to share about the other question? Okay, I think I can see better doing it. Yeah, cool. Okay, so the first question that we answered was around COVID adjustments. How can we get people to and from the farm safely? So there were a few things that came up. One of them being to get around some of the issues with lift sharing would be you could encourage entire households or bubbles to sign up for a Glean. Another would be you could have a maximum of 1 passenger per car, so you'd still be able to have lift shares depending on if people are comfortable. There was also ideas around getting in touch with either minibus hire companies, schools, or community minibus schemes, essentially to try and get cheap or free minibus hire, and then in which case you could have sort of 1 person per row. And it was also mentioned that could be run as a kind of a shuttle service from like the nearest train station or bus stop, so you could have 1 driver going sort of to and from, with the obvious PPE considerations. I think that about covers it, right?
I guess you were mentioning also charity discounts on vans and things like that.
Oh yeah, asking for it on the cheap. Yeah, people are often really keen to help when they understand what it's for. Cool. So maybe Petra or Joy wanted to dive in for the next question.
Joy, do you want to do that? It seems like you have a really good idea of the next question.
What was the question that you were?
The one that we were looking at was the second question, I think, narratives to encourage people to get involved.
Great.
Yes.
Thanks.
So Petra was talking about making comparisons with the food journey from abroad, comparing it with locally gleaned food. We touched on the idea that it's going to help others by providing food to food banks or cheap food elsewhere. And I think that those are things that people encourages people to look at coming on Gleans. But I think it's more difficult when we're talking about that they've got a bit of a confidence issues in actually coming. So it's talking to people in terms of what it's going to be like and encouraging them to have a go, boosting their confidence about it. It'll be fine, you can do it. It rained all day, but we loved it. You can work at your own pace. We had a great time sharing lunch. Come on, try it. You've only got to do it once, and all that sort of encouraging words to get people actually on a Glean. And I think once that they get there, it's either for them or not, basically. Is that enough?
Thank you. Have I captured everything?
I think so, yes.
Lovely. Thank you. Is that everything from your group?
Yes.
Wonderful. Could I pass to Charmaine, Karen and Claire's group? Any of you? You there? I can't see you because I'm screen sharing, but
I think everyone's muted.
I was just waiting to see if anyone else wanted to speak from our group, but it doesn't look like it. So we actually just we didn't really respond directly to all the questions or even pick one in particular. We just responded, we just asked questions and discussed what felt right. But I think it came under care considerations as one of them, which was the importance of an induction. An induction on how to harvest and health and safety and, that kind of thing. And I think Charmaine was saying that her experience was that the induction bit was important. And adding to that, around care considerations, from my experience, we've managed to get either the farmer or one of the crop harvesters to come and speak as well and give their tips for harvesting, which has been really helpful because it's like a different voice, which has helped. And something else around, I can't remember whether it's health and safety is in one of the other questions, but again from experience, that if you're inviting families, it's worth limiting the number of children per adult, because if you're offering gleaning in the summer holidays, you can tend to find a bit of it becomes a bit of a childcare offer, and you can end up with a lot of children per adult, which becomes quite a health and safety issue, because the experience I certainly had was that parents were so excited about being in the field and gleaning that they weren't really keeping an eye on the kids, and it became quite a challenge, health and safety wise. And the other thing probably relates to the question about how to involve people. Somebody asked the question about, have you ever experienced a public call out and people saying they'll come and then not coming? And the response from Charmaine was that no, mostly people who say they're coming come, but that in her experience, keeping it to, in her case, to about 10 people, she was saying it was better to have a smaller group that are well inducted and kind of effective than have a big group. I think that's right. I mean, anyone else in the group correct me, because I didn't take any notes. I'm just doing this all from memory.
Yeah, I'll agree with that, Karen. I do believe that it is best to start off anyway with smaller groups, because you are looking after everybody's health and safety. It sort of just makes you a bit more calm to have the smaller group to manage initially. But also on the care consideration side of things, I didn't get around to saying it, but making sure people know to bring drinks and to wear comfortable clothing, suitable clothing and suitable footwear, I think is important, and also taking extra drinks or something to nibble on for people is quite a nice gesture. I found that a lot of them didn't want to take the expenses, so even just getting some refreshments for them or something like that, just in case they do forget, I think it made it quite nice when we had our breaks that we were all just standing around chatting and drinking together. So yeah, I'll add that to the care considerations.
And
if
there was
anybody else
just
had
one
anything.
practical thing. I'm not quite sure where it fits with the questions, but I was just saying that I collect cardboard boxes and flatten them, and they're great for lining vehicles for transporting the food. So if you haven't got a van or a farm vehicle or something that is suitable, you find that if people have driven there themselves, they're often more likely to volunteer to transport the food if you've got some nice flattened cardboard boxes and can line their car with them, so that it stays as clean as possible, as easy to clean as possible. But that just seemed to help, because we weren't always sure how much we were going to harvest, and so sometimes it was too much for the vehicle that we had.
Definitely agree with that. We had some messy vehicles at the end of it, so I'm taking that tip from Karen this time. Definitely make sure that the cars are protected, and also again, whichever container you're filling, remind the volunteers that they have to be lifted, so don't overfill them, because we've got to think about the health and safety of their backs and so forth as well. So decent sized crops, not huge marrows, and just be mindful of how much we put into the containers as well. I'll stop there. Sorry, Karen.
No, it's fine. I've said plenty. I suppose just one last thing I was going to say is I always have a big thing of sun cream available, because even in this country we do get sunny days gleaning, and if we're out for a while, people often forget to bring sun cream and hats and things like that. I do remind them on the invite and on the registration and the confirmation, but I just find it really useful to have a big pot of sun cream available. Obviously in the COVID, that might be a bit of a challenge, but anyway, sun cream.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And just going to the last group, that was Tina, Steve, Susie and Phil. And these, this will all be shared with you afterwards, all these post-its.
Right, well, one of the things that we discussed in our group was the fact that more and more people now are more aware of the damage that's been done to the planet because of the industry, I suppose, and all the things that have gone wrong in the last 20 or 30 years, I suppose. David Attenborough has highlighted it with his TV series, The Blue Planet, and the amount of plastic that's in the ocean. And I think more people have now become more aware of the fact that we have to look after the environment. So if you can inspire people to join a Glean because it will be helping the planet, helping their own communities, yes, it will be helping the hunger situation and the waste that is occurring on farms, but it'll also help the environment as well. And my belief, and I think this was pretty much agreed within the group we were talking about, is that the youth of today are very interested in the environment, because the older generation, and I include myself in that, you know, in 20 or 30 years' time, we'll be gone, and we have to try and leave a legacy for the younger people to make sure that they look after the planet for our children and our grandchildren. And gleaning is, okay, it's a small part of it, but it's an important part of it. So that was something that we discussed, and by getting that message across, we could probably inspire younger people to join a gleaning group. That's me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Steve.
Talking about the climate emergency as well in particular. So, I mean, still just the same as Steve was saying, but if you frame it in terms of climate emergency, I think that's, you know, it just reiterates the urgency of it, and it's something that, again, that young people, I think, are acutely aware of these days. And we also talked about at the time, you know, during the time of COVID, how actually, yes, there's logistical problems about getting out into the fields, but once you're out there in the fresh air, it's one of the healthiest places and safest places to be at the moment. So if it can be, you know, framed in that sense at the moment, then rather than putting people off, because, you know, people feel limited by what they can do at the moment, then there's, you know, there are benefits as well.
We also touched on that first question about getting people to and from farms safely, and it's quite a geographically dependent thing, but if you do have a very localized volunteer cluster, then active travel might be a possibility. And Steve mentioned trying to get his Lions group cycling to a Glean in the coming weeks, because a lot of them are coming from 3 or 4 miles away from to the farm. So active travel considerations, if the geography permits it. Our group also touched on one other question, but it was also question 3 about volunteer care considerations. And it was basically about making sure people feel super welcome when they come, particularly on the first time. And sometimes that's an interpersonal thing, making sure they feel that the organiser's approachable and they're able to ask any questions and they feel like they're in the right place. Particularly if it's someone's first time on a farm, they might find it a little bit disorientating, and if they don't know people in the group as well, it might be an experience where they're not sure if they're in the right place. So I think for the organiser, there's something there to be done about the interpersonal side of things. So being warm, welcoming, and getting a bit of rapport with them, so they feel like they belong.
And making sure they can ask questions and bring up any concerns that they have as well.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
It's something physical that wakes your brain up as well. So maybe as we're coming back from the break, it's do it. It's a finger coordination exercise where basically you have one thumb up on one hand and a little finger up on the other. And what you're trying to do is to switch them. and you'll actually find that your brain struggles to make that switch because it's not a regular movement that you do. So I'm seeing lots of pairs of thumbs and pairs of little fingers. So it's just a silly little thing, really, to get people gathered as a group and focused on the moment, and you'll notice the little brain, because effectively, a bit like learning the piano or a musical instrument, you're trying to train your fingers to do a movement that it doesn't usually do, and it's kind of a good analogy for these new neural pathways that we'll need for a better food system and a more fair society. We'll need to think in different ways, and we'll need our brain to slightly reprogram itself in order to create more sustainable communities. So training ourselves to think slightly differently, particularly in groups, is to be encouraged. But I thought that'd be a good little icebreaker coming back from the break.
I hope you've got the chance to stretch your legs a little bit as well as your fingers and thumbs. I've made myself a nuclear cup of coffee, so I'm sorted. I think more or less everybody is here. Cool. So yeah, again, I wanted to welcome Damien. Oh, he's just got up and disappeared. He's probably quite only shutting the door. Yeah, so Damien has been sort of our lead contact at the Felix Project. They're a redistribution organisation that works mostly in London, but they've been very supportive of our Gleaning projects. I think we've been working together. This will be our sort of third Gleaning season, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, I've also been, the Felix Project has reacted really fantastically to a lot of the sort of exacerbated food insecurity that's been taking place in London, and have built some alliances with some great community organisations, other redistribution organisations such as Fair Share. And we actually trained a couple of Damien's team as well in some of the Gleaning last year as a part of that project. So yeah, I just wanted to give them a very warm welcome. Maybe I might just ask a couple of questions first, and then we can open it up to the floor if anyone's got any sort of specific questions for Damien. But yeah, how are you doing today? All right?
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's actually quite tranquil here, which is very unreal, unnerving slightly.
Fantastic. Well, I'm glad we could offer you something to do during that time then, at least. I'm sure there's plenty to catch up on. But yeah, I guess maybe it would be good for us to, maybe Phil's got some questions as well, but just what it is that sort of Gleaning has really assisted with the Felix Project, and kind of what it means to get fresh produce in the door, and what it is that you look for in sort of a collaboration with Gleaning organisations.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, of all the volunteering opportunities that we put out, so we use a system where we shout out to our volunteers, much in the same way you do, but the Gleaning opportunities always go straight away. They're the most desirable days out, and as an organisation, so quite early on we looked at, I think I've been on a couple of Gleans myself where we would turn up, all of your intrepid volunteers would be doing all of the work, and we'd be turning up at the back end of it, and it just didn't feel right. So we love the solidarity. We really appreciate your coordination and organisation, but we feel that we should be part of that whole Gleaning exercise. So and our volunteers love it, particularly when we've got links with the farmer, when we get the introduction like was discussed earlier on, is great positivity. And to give you context, as a food surplus organisation, we see a lot of food that's got a load of air miles on it, and so whilst we're saving it from landfill, it's the food mile compared to what we get killed, bear no comparison. So people appreciate the freshness, the fact that it's far more kind of sustainable, and and the fact that it's more nutritious. You know, people don't tend to appreciate the fact that something coming off a field, you know, as the weeks pass, the nutritional value of that product diminishes and goes into the ether. So it's far better for the end user who received that food. Yeah. I mean, I could go on, or do you want to carry on, James? Yeah.
I think one thing, so we just had like sort of a bit of a breakout with some questions, and one thing that I think has been sort of on a lot of people's lips is how things have worked in sort of the context of COVID-19. And I think obviously because you're managing volunteers, you've got people traveling to, whether it's farms or wholesalers or whatever it is, like collecting surplus. It might be interesting for you to just share some reflections on how you've had to react to that and how it's affected kind of the way that you've been able to operate.
Yeah. So we're an organisation who are tackling food waste and food poverty, and we deliver to about 350 frontline charities. But once COVID hit, we then formed the London Food Alliance alongside Fair Share and City Harvest, so to cover the whole of London. And we, between ourselves, we divvied up all of the boroughs, and Felix Project took 14 boroughs, and those were mainly on the kind of the north of the river. And the aim was that we supplied them with as much food as we possibly could, and then DEFRA would fund the gaps that they had. We also then, further on down the line, DEFRA funded a great big chunk of money, which we went in centrally, went to purchase food, and then of that food, we were getting about 50 tonne a week of purchased food, and it was looking at where the gaps were in our food supply, because we, as a surplus charity, we see stuff that's towards the end of its life that people need to, you know, can't sell because of either a short use by date or a best before date. But we don't tend to see much in the way of tins and long dated store cupboard goods, which was really in high demand during COVID. But the DEFRA money allowed us to purchase some of that. The money for that, the 50 tonne a week, has now dried up, and we're seeing the tail off in that supply. In terms of our supply during COVID, we've always had about 40% of our food coming from online retail. At North London, we've kind of mostly done away with the links to retail back of store, because it's small volumes and doesn't offer us the economies of scale that we need going forward. And it's far better that those stores are paired with individual charities who are located nearby. What we saw was immediately panic buying, which meant that we didn't get any food at all. Then we saw the closure of the restaurants and the food chain above it, and all of those cards coming down, and all of it was stuff with a short use by date and a bit of fresh veg. Logistically, it was a challenge. Then we saw a number of restaurant chains who, through sort of benevolence, they paid for, they got the furloughed staff to come back in and work on charitable meals, and then they bankrolled the produce side of things. So they were doing meals for about £1.60, £1.70. We were calling in, I mean, the Ivy group did, so Le Clarice, Ivy, Bill's, Scott's, a number of other restaurants. They did 1 million meals, and we collected 100,000 of them. And we had partner charities who had a good distribution network who we could get that out to very, very quickly. Then as the online retail came up, their sales went through the roof. We saw different things happening. We saw Tesco's and Sainsbury's, it dried up completely. I think they just had all the resources focused on getting the food out. There was probably loads of waste, but we weren't getting any of it. Whereas the small individual charities with a more sustainable ethos like Farm Drop and Oddbox, we got exponentially higher levels of food. we were getting, 10 ton from one organisation up until a couple of weeks ago, and that has now, as they've started to optimise their processes, we're getting 1 ton. Trouble is, it's all of the time it's trying to match supply and demand. On the demand side, so as well as everything we were already doing, we had to furnish these hubs that were operating, and every single charity that we deal with wanted more food. Hundreds more signed up. 50 or so that we've got onto our books. And it's pretty dreadful. We're one step removed from what's happening out there, with the public. So all of the charities that we deal with, 70% pre-COVID were cooking community meals, 30% were pure food bank. They all, and the people that cook, they tend to give out food afterwards. And everyone changed. Almost 95% are now distributing food like a food bank, but doing the final mile delivery, and very few are cooking. And just the stories coming back, they're we had charities in yesterday accusing us of kind of discriminating against them. And we're just saying, look, we've got 10 ton going out here a day, plus the 50 from the depot just a couple of doors down. And we're trying to be equitable and fair, and we try to give everyone the same, within reason. Some will get a bit of extra, and when there's a glut, we've got a list of people who can handle more. But it's just when during COVID we've trebled the amount of food. Trebling the amount of food means we've done 10 million meals in 6 months, first 6 months of the year. Last year we did 6 million meals. And when we say meals, we're talking about tonnage, and we use the wrap figure of 420 grams as a meal. But that food, if you look at the food poverty in London, it was 1.5 million people prior to COVID. It's probably more like 3 to 4 million now. You look at the days that have gone by this year, we're talking about those people suffering food poverty every day. You're talking about the need for about 800 million meals, and we've done 10 million. And it's why we're just constantly getting hit with requests for more food. It's just not enough. And there's, with the best will in the world, we're going to be a sticky plaster over a gaping wound that's caused by policy and everything else that I'm not allowed to go into. There's some real positives in the COVID hubs. So before COVID happened, we as an organisation, there was a team of consultants said, we can come in and do some work for you. We said, what we'd like you to do is look at what is the food waste in the sort of London area M25 corridor. They said, right, easily grabbable is 10 times the food that you currently get. Looking at that, we run 30 vans at the moment. We can't go up to 300 vans. They're battered. All of our team is volunteers, and they say they can drive. It's debatable if you're coming out of me. The worst of it is we've hired a load of vans during COVID, and literally they were brand new, and they are. I've got no idea what the cost is going to be of all the panels we're going to have to replace. But that aside, the one thing we knew was the infrastructure out there in terms of distributing this food. There's probably about 1,000-ish charities dealing with food poverty in London. And it's very inefficient in terms of, they're hiring spaces, they're going for the same set of funding. There's probably a better way to do it. But what COVID has given us with the hubs is it's given us that scalability whereby, so the hubs are doing 3 things. They're doing the individuals are shielded. They're doing the individuals who are applying because they're newly unemployed or just can't cope or are isolating and can't get out. And they're also dealing with the charities who are on their patch, who are coming in. and they're holistically looking at the food needs. So they're getting the surpluses from us, and then they're plugging the gaps in terms of purchases. But it's the first time ever that, you know, Sustain do this thing called Food Beyond the Food Bank, and it identifies on about 10 different factors how well a borough is doing on food poverty. It's a great report, and it praises those that are doing well, but it names and shames the boroughs that do badly. And we've seen it as an organisation that the named and shamed organisations are reacting to that and suddenly putting, you know, plans in place to resolve and redress those issues. COVID has brought all of that forward, and what we see is the tons that go into those borough hubs. Now they are able to prioritise need based on levels of food insecurity, and also coach people back if they're isolating. But they've got money, is there a way that we can do things better, coaching them on online shopping or whatever it is. But it means for us that as an organisation, there's someone there who's actually able to means test and get the food to where it's needed most. And you know, the shout outs that they've done and the shout outs that we've done, the levels of volunteering have been absolutely enormous. We've now, moving on from that, we've got the Fair Share partnership, whereby we were working together. We wanted to access the food that the Fair Share network have got, and now we've agreed with Fair Share that we're going to be doing the whole of London. So we're taking over the Deptford depot, and we'll be taking over all of that food supply and all of the charities as well. So we'll be moving south and what have you.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so it's all very, very positive. Sorry, yeah.
No, it's amazing stuff. But
no, it's fine.
I think it just highlights the kind of unpredictability and the and how many challenges there have been.
Yeah.
But I think to take the positives out of that, it seems like there were just these opportunities for collaboration that probably wouldn't have otherwise happened that will develop and that are going to become really important aspects kind of beyond the COVID crisis as well. Very much the same with, like, we were able to get some funding to kind of put together these webinars and the support as a result of COVID, but the hope is that the resources and everything that everyone's going to get are going to be very useful kind of beyond that. And it speaks to further conversations around, there are some groups, I'm thinking particular sort of with Petra and Susie in Hornbeam, like sort of discussions around like whether we set up as a gleaning group or whether we connect with other gleaning groups to be sort of recipients of produce and things like that. There's definitely some exploration, and there's some questions around kind of storage as well. So particularly based organisations, knowing that these hubs exist and that there might be kind of these already existing networks with surplus to kind of plug into is really amazing. We've got some other ground to cover, but I just wanted to say thank you so much, Damien, for sort of sharing your perspective. And what I can do is, if other people have questions for Damien, then they can share them with me, and then I can kind of follow up with him and just sort of try and get a bit of information out of him through that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and what I didn't say was, of course, the charities that we deliver to and the end users. You know, we get the feed from them, and we see what they're doing with this produce, and it's just quite amazing. You know, particularly, you know, Pumpkin Moon, and just the fact that produce was, you know, we were able to store it for 6 weeks, and they were getting that regular supply. And we've even had a Pumpkin Moon baby has just appeared in one of our volunteers scattered the seeds in her compost, and she's got
I've got a Pumpkin Moon squash plant in my garden, actually, thanks to Gil. That's great to know. That's a big pumpkin farm that we tend to go to every year. Fantastic, Damien. Right. I will, as I said, I will share some questions with everyone.
Lovely.
And then I can pass stuff on to you. No, I really appreciate it. And all the best, and continue good, great work.
Thanks a lot, Damien. Really nice to see you.
Thanks a lot. Cheers all. Thank you. Bye bye.
You're welcome to hang around if you want to for the rest of the chat. But
I might listen in, but yeah, thank you very much. Cheers.
I'm just going to do a quick time check. It's just my clock's saying just gone 12:05, and we've got until 12:30, and then James, Phil and I can stay on afterwards as well if anything needs to spill over, or everyone wants to discuss anything. So back over to you.
Fantastic. So yeah, there's a couple of options that we've got. We want to kind of move on to more of this question around onward distribution, some of the sort of practicalities of what Damien was talking about and how that's going to kind of work. But so we've got a potential presentation that Phil can deliver. We also wanted to give Charmaine a bit of an opportunity to kind of share some of her experiences. Charmaine, I don't know if you feel like there's sort of some reflections that have kind of come out from what you've heard so far today, or wanted to speak a little bit about some of your experiences with kind of volunteers or onward distribution. You don't have to have the floor for very long. If you kind of prefer to maybe just field some questions from people, happy to take it from you on what would be the best way to go there.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk a bit about, I totally agree with what Damien was saying, that through the COVID, it seems that a lot of the community groups and charities are beginning to collaborate more and work together. And I think that is key in probably reducing food poverty and making our diets a bit more sustainable, because the more that we can connect with local groups and find out what is out there, I find that there's a lot of councils that maybe are not up to date with everything that's happening out there. So it does take a bit of background work to find out what is happening in your local area, but there is always, it seems unfortunately, that there's always a food bank and maybe a community fridge that's setting up locally. There's usually two, and I find speaking to those people, they'll know of other things that are happening in the area as well. So I think it's just about getting out there in terms of redistributing. And I would also suggest that you invite those groups along on the Glean days, so that they can take produce straight away, so you haven't got to think about the storage side of things. So they can take it back to their head office or their storage area. So invite at least one representative from each community group along with you. That's what I would recommend personally. I don't know if anybody had any more specific questions, or yourself, James.
Great, no, that's really useful stuff, Charmaine. I appreciate you sharing that. So yeah, you're based in Buckinghamshire, and just for a bit of background, Charmaine ran some cleaning days last year, and also has her own kind of community food initiative where she's been kind of using some of the produce that she's gleaned. But have you found that there's have you found it in terms of, were you limited in the amount of produce that you could pick based on the number of organisations that you could redistribute to? Or I'd be interested just to get a sense of what your priorities were, whether it was just like, we're going to glean everything and kind of find groups to do it, or you very much worked out what your limit was, as it were.
Because it was the first one, we literally gleaned as much as physically possible. The groups were quite willing to take on as much as possible. Some of them had storage, but also I had it in my mind, because I am in the catering field, that I was going to make some preserves and things like that anyway, which I think helps on the sustainability side of a project. If you can create these preserves, I created some marrow jams and chutneys and things that I sold at a local Christmas fair, and that went back into the community cooking classes. And fortunately, with the COVID support, that came in really handy so that I can continue. So I think it depends what's available in your area. I knew that there were quite a few different food groups that had contact with people in need. Sorry, I'm out in the back of a farm at the moment, so the door's going a bit. But
lovely.
So yeah, so I do believe, depending on what is in your area, that I would just say go for it and find people. There's always, WI groups and things like that that may be willing to help make some preserves out of it as well. I found that there's a lot of people coming forward to help. Hope that answers your question.
Great, yeah, it does. Phil, did you have any questions for Charmaine?
Yeah, hi Charmaine.
Hi Phil.
Nice to meet you, virtually at least. I've eaten some of the sweet corn that you gleaned last September. It was delicious.
Oh, it's lovely.
So I wanted to ask if you'd ever encountered a available crop that was, it was more voluminous. There was more of it there than you had local distribution outlets for, be that through the food bank or community fridge you mentioned, and in instances where there was more surplus than you had local links to supply. What approach did you take?
Well, luckily, as I do run a community company, it was, we had quite a lot of pumpkins come through. So we decided to hold a day and show people what to do with the pumpkins. What to do with the pumpkins. So luckily, Halloween is around that time. People have surplus pumpkins and things like that. So we had a little day, and even just putting a quick advert out there, we had quite a few families come along, find out what they could do with the pumpkins. So yeah, we just made it into a community day, and you can generate income from that and help with your future gleans. And I think it's about being as flexible and thinking outside of the box is what you have to be prepared to do. Think on your toes.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think in terms of this question around alternative avenues, the running community events can be a fantastic way of doing it. And despite COVID restrictions, it is still possible in some contexts. And I think the collaboration here, I'd say again, is the key, not only as Charmaine pointed out, in getting community organisations to come to the gleans themselves if they're going to want to use some produce, but in certain areas, if you have kind of cultural hubs, like a lot of people want to incorporate, food tells like amazing stories culturally. And I think when you have it can be cultural hubs, theatre groups, musicians, whatever it is, people that are like maybe very used to using events, putting on events can get a lot out of that kind of collaboration. And then you can kind of bring a food element into that. And then once you've got everyone there, you can just dish it all out.
I definitely agree with that. And I found the mosques, they have a bank of volunteers already for, say, for Eid events and for other community events. And they do offer a lot of support to the community in times of crisis. So during the COVID, several of the mosques locally were cooking meals as well. So they will always have at least contacts that you could probably offload some produce, or people that would be willing to help cook some dishes, I think. And I think as long as your food, there's somebody present that has food hygiene qualifications, then most of the time it's fine. Just get somebody that's got food qualification and somewhere safe and clean to prepare it.
Right. Karen, I believe you had a question.
Yeah, I was just curious because about food insurance. You said a bit about health and safety there. So obviously outside the COVID, what are the kind of insurance? What's the insurance situation in food? Because you mentioned WI might be interested in making some pickles and jams and stuff like that, and that it can raise funding, which is brilliant. I just wondered, both now in the COVID and also outside, what kind of food insurance considerations do we have to consider around that?
If you are preparing, as far as I know, on the health and safety side of things, it's the same as during the pandemic outside, you have to register with your local council, which can be done online, and with a certain amount of time they will come around and check your premises. It can be done from home as long as you have risk assessments and a food hygiene qualification as well, and they're quite cheap and easy to obtain, so I wouldn't let that put you off if you haven't got it. But also, again, collaborating with local communities, soup kitchens, community centres, asking them to use their kitchen. If they know it's for community, I'm quite good at begging. So, ask for a freebie here and then because it's going back into the community. I'm sure there'll be someone somewhere close to you that would help out.
Yeah, I think that's something key that came out of the presentation that we're now not going to give, but we will definitely share that information. Is that when it comes to the question of kind of the farm logistics side of the sort of preparation and redistribution is very much begging, borrowing, not stealing from farmers. Like, we tend to find that you could have hours of shifting crates from one end of the field to another, whereas there's a very good chance that a farmer would be willing to give up 5 minutes of their time just to shift it in a tractor from A to B, or kind of offering, once you get through this process of running a gleaning day and have an understanding of what you want to pack the materials into and how you're going to get it from somewhere to a van, often a farmer is just going to have some stuff lying around that they can that they will be able to help you with. And often, because they're very keen to help out with good causes, you'll find them very generous and willing to help in that regard. Cool. Did anyone else have any questions specifically for Charmaine at the moment? Steve?
Well, my question was with regard to a comment that that Damien made about fair share.
Yes.
Distributing the produce. The glean that we're going to do in 3 weeks' time is going to produce 6 tons of pears, and Chris Hibbert has organised Fair Share to come and collect it from us. Could you just give us a little bit of a rundown on how Fair Share operate and how logistically it works?
I can offer an initial response, and then maybe Phil has a sort of specific relationship with how he works in Sussex with Fair Share. So they're essentially a franchising organisation. So they have many hubs across the country, and they all work in slightly different ways. So some of them, so Phil's arrangement, I'll let his share about. But what I suspect will happen with Chris's Glean is that they will use Fair Share National. So they outsource the transport to a kind of external food logistics company. So they have sort of a set of requirements that needs to be packed on pallets and wrapped, and only 6 crates high and this sort of thing. I guess one of the considerations that I'd like to share about Fair Share is that they obviously will then distribute that nationally to a series of hubs. And what that can be amazing when you're dealing with large amounts that it's quite difficult to get. So 6 tons of apples and pears is a lot, but it's normally an amount that they can sort of absorb into their network, and they're probably the only organisation in the country that's able to do that kind of nationwide. But some people may want to focus their kind of distribution in a much more localised context to ensure that food is staying kind of in an area where people are suffering from food insecurity there. And that's an example of where building kind of more local links with organisations may be better, but just with this understanding that obviously that can require a little bit more logistics. But Phil, did you want to just share how your sort of arrangements with Fair Share in Sussex?
Yeah, sure. I guess the one way to think about Fair Share is they're like a wholesale provider to either food banks or organisations that feed people directly. So they fulfil a quite similar role to the Felix project that, as Damien explained. Within Sussex, Fair Share are very active. Basically, the Gleaning Network's collaborated with Fair Share Sussex quite closely. That's involved occasionally borrowing a van to take to a gleaning day. That's quite a nice favour to be able to call in. They're also quite willing to do collections. Say at the end of a gleaning day, they might send a driver with an empty van to collect produce. They're also very happy to offer crates, empty crates. So if we have our own vehicle, we might at the beginning of the day go to FareShare, load up on crates, then go to the farm, return the crates full. Essentially, they're you can think of them as a wholesale way to get through very high volumes of gleaned produce. What they don't offer you, because they're an intermediary, as James was mentioning, they don't offer you a direct relationship with the organisations feeding people in need. And if you're really motivated to have that direct link with people in food poverty, with the organisations that are serving the community on the front line, then that's not necessarily the role that FareShare can play. However, they do make your your life so much easier as a gleaning coordinator that you can do one delivery and then know that that produce is going out to so many other organisations. So it kind of depends on your on how strong your existing network of organisations to deliver to is. And one other point, just in terms of FareShare National, in Sussex and in Kent, in the autumn, there's such an abundance of apples that it can actually be quite hard to give them away because there's so many. So that's where FareShare National can come in, and that arranging of pallets to be distributed from the farm that you're gleaning at to other FareShares in other parts of the country, be it Birmingham, Newcastle, Scotland. That's something that we've done in Sussex before with the help of the FareShare network. So that's a little bit about them. The other point really is that because gleaning, you're very likely to acquire a high amount of one particular thing. It's quite hard for any one organisation like a food bank to receive 1 ton of apples or whatever. So by using FareShare, you're sort of immediately breaking into smaller quantities, whatever your donation is.
Yeah, well, I think with the pumpkins that Chris and his teams got, I think they got 18 tons. And I think those pumpkins were distributed to, from what Chris has told me, to 6 or 7 different hubs around the country. So he said 2 tons here, 3 tons there, 2 tons somewhere else. So thanks for that. That gives me a good insight as to how FareShare work.
I think we've got time for one more question. This one on any part of the day or for Charmaine.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Can I raise the issue of risk assessments? Do we need to complete those for our gleans? Is that something that you would do?
Yeah, I can respond to that. So the way we cover the issue of risk assessments is to have a generic gleaning risk assessment which covers the activity of gleaning on farm settings. So that covers general risks of volunteers working on farms, general farm related risks, and whether other things to do with outdoor work. We then, in preparation of a gleaning day, we ask the farmer, are there any site-specific risks? And we ask the farmer to share their risk assessment for their workers. And then basically you can cross, what's the word? You can check basically whether the generic risk assessment has anything that's deficient based on the farmer's one. And that might be that there's a pond that's deep. It might be that they have a particular area of the farm that has bio waste, which might be hazardous. It could be various things to that particular. So by cross-checking the generic one that you have for volunteers working on farms and the site-specific one that the farmer shares, you can basically cover your bases for that specific event.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Are we able to have a copy of that pro form, or have we got a copy? Thank you.
We'll be able to share that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've throughout today, I've just been making a quick note of sort of a list of resources that I think would be useful for everybody to have access to. And what I'll probably do is just identify a place on the website for it. So it would be an editable Word document with all of these risk assessment questions. There'll be another one, which is the questions that you want to ask a farmer in the interim, i.e., do you have a massive pond, or like, you know, a tractor that's gone AWOL? Will you allow children on site? Kind of all of these questions that form a part of the process leading up to a gleaning day. Some of that information is available on the toolkit already. There would also be some text on what you would include in kind of an insurance documentation, or just a few of these things that are kind of coming up as a result of these sessions. And then there would just be a page on our website that's got X number of resources that you can just download.
Okay, I'm just popped into my head as being public liability insurance. Is that something that we're going to need?
We currently have been suggesting that needs to be the case. So as an organisation, we've essentially got a very short sentence that describes gleaning on our policy. And then what we do is we've obviously just been on the phone to our insurer and said, this is what gleaning is. Can you insure us with this? I think that the ideal situation is if you are incorporated as an organisation, then you can seek your own public liability insurance with that. I think a secondary option would be if you're able to collaborate with another local organisation that does have its own public liability insurance, ensure that they're able to add it to their schedule. And then the last resort, which is less than ideal because it's probably not that likely to be successful, but you could speak to a farmer and say to them, this is going to be the situation. They will have their own insurance there. Are they willing for the gleaning day to be held under their insurance? The chances are that if they were to say yes, they would have to supervise the entire day. And that's something that we've not personally had to experience before, obviously, because we've been fortunate enough to be funded for this. But these are questions that we're kind of exploring concurrently as well as feedback, because I mean, obviously I'm not a legal expert myself, but yeah, we've been asking kind of some questions about this to try and find some workarounds, because we appreciate that it's not just as easy as, you know, getting somebody to have insurance.
Okay. Finally, from me anyway, the funding I think is quite a big issue. Is it possible to do a bit more on that, really? You know, where funding comes from? I mean, obviously raising funds can be done, but I'd like a few ideas about how that can be achieved.
A fairly significant proportion of the fourth session will focus on this. You might have noticed I sent an email out after the last session, which had a couple of links to organisations we're friend with called Semble. So they're running they run a series of workshops around their sort of reason for existing is to try and help small grassroots community organisations to be kind of resilient and to have the process they need in order. So yeah, if you check out that email from last Friday, I believe I sent, it will have a couple of links to some various resources they have, some workshops, and they're going to be joining us, I think, Phil, on the fourth webinar.
Yeah, on Thursday the 10th of September.
Yeah. It had the added benefit of one of their employees being our former gleaning colleague as well. So yeah, we'll be having a workshop with somebody who's very experienced getting funding for gleaning, and the various different routes you might be able to go down through that, and just sort of building that organisational resilience as well.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add quickly, James, because I remember Karen asked about the insurance. In terms of redistributing any products that are made, you would need to have a product insurance as well, product liability insurance, because you're moving it onto, even if you're giving it away, it's best to get that kind of insurance just to cover your back in case. So I just thought I'd add that because I see that Karen asked it before.
Cool.
Something quickly as well. Sorry, I know we're running out of time, but I think sometimes volunteer insurance doesn't. At least in the charity I used to work for, we were only insured for over 18-year-olds, for example. So I guess I'm just wondering whether kids and Gleaning really work together anyway from an insurance point of view, but also in general, I suppose, whether getting a school group or something like that, Gleaning is a useful thing, or whether it's just, you know, I don't know, that they're the best people for doing that kind of work.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point, Susie, and thank you for making it. I guess the way I'd respond to that is different groups are going to see that everybody's got kind of their unique motivations for doing that. And another Charmaine who was on the group last time, obviously she worked at East Kent College and had been running Gleaning with kind of sixth form and secondary school students. I think if you were interested in bringing school groups along, that would have to be done in collaboration with sort of a staff member from the group, and then a prior arrangement would be able to be made that essentially the sort of safety of the responsibility for the safety of those young people would rest with the school group, essentially. So yeah, there can be some complex kind of legal ground to navigate with this a little bit, but you do make a good point around the children, and if that's something you're interested in doing and providing sort of that experience, then yeah, there might be that there's kind of additional recover required. Or, I mean, insurance companies are insurance companies, right? So they're always going to try and wriggle out of something, but it's always worth having a recorded copy of a phone call and lots of emails, like being very specific about what you need to be covered, and then saying, yes, this is covered.
I think, yeah, your point about working with the school, or, you know, yeah, the educational establishment, that they'll know how these kind of things work because they're used to doing trips and things like that as well, won't they?
And drowning in endless reams of bureaucracy. Great. I notice it's 32 minutes past 12, so this is sort of beyond our kind of official end point. I think, as Maddie said, Phil herself and me are willing to stick around. We're just going to be having a bit of a chat anyway, so if anyone did want to stay and explore any further questions, then please do.
Just got a couple of you could call it homework, but let's choose a more friendly, less triggering word. So things to do between now and next week to start to kind of really make what you're learning real in your context. So I put in the chat just a couple of sort of takeaways that will help you to sort of take this forward. So I put in there, you might want to write this down or just copy and paste it from the chat or whatever. Map out where you might source volunteers from and look at the kind of narrative they might respond to. And then in terms of redistribution, make a list of all the different places in your local area that you could distribute the gleaned produce to, and who the end eater might be for each. So there's just a couple of prompts to start to really look around locally, or more widely if you're doing it already, into the kind of profile of your area in terms of gleaning. And of course, anything else that you've taken away from the session today. I know it's a lot of information, and maybe we could just have a very short little checkout round, just a few words from everybody about how they are at the end of this session. If unless that people have to shoot off immediately, that'd be really nice.